Hey, welcome everyone to the Prophecy Roundtable, where we're going to give you an insightful and entertaining chat about the end times. We do not promise to have all the answers. We've got a couple, maybe, who knows? But we're going to have a good chat. And to help us weed through some of the things in the Book of Revelation and other places, we have Sam Fulcher. He is joining us. Scott will be joining us later, and of course, we have the good John Haller with us as well. So, hey, gentlemen. It is great to have you here.
Good to be here.
Awesome.
Good.
Yeah.
Is Scott here?
Well, he's coming. He's coming.
Okay.
You know, he's a little slow. He's from the South. So we and this is good. We can take little pot shots at him while he's not here.
That's right. I had the exact same thought when I saw that text. So go for it.
Yeah, it's really good. So tonight we're looking at a number of things, but we're kind of going to look at some of the timing, which is always a tricky kind of thing, right? When we're trying to figure out exactly the sequence. I think some things are fairly straightforward. Like Jesus comes at the end after the whole tribulation's over, right? But other things are a little bit trickier. We're going to look at when does the judgment of Babylon happen. We're going to consider the 144,000 and the three angels that we hear about in Revelation chapter 14. So those are just some of the topics. If you guys out there have some questions, please throw them in the chat. We will do our best to get to those. We may not get to all of them just because there's not enough time, but we will definitely try. And if you would put a Q in front of your question, it really helps us out to see if you're just chatting or if you're actually wanting to ask us something. So, Sam, so kind of tell us some of the things that you've been studying and where some of these studies have landed you on various questions. And I know we're going to start at Revelation 19:2. So kind of give us a rundown of what you're thinking.
So we've been in discussion. I've been in discussion with Nelson Walters and our team, and I've kind of raised the issue of, we have the second half of the 70th week, and a lot of things happen in there, and including, we know that the harlot is described as riding the beast. So initially, anyway, she's kind of in charge of the beast. But then we also learn in Revelation that 17 through 19 that the beast hates the harlot and actually ends up destroying her with fire. And this is before the beast is destroyed himself. So there's a lot of activity going on. When we talk about the destruction of Mystery Babylon and then the destruction of the beast and the beast empire. And so, that just got me to thinking, well, how can we parse this out? Can we, I don't know that we can come up with an exact day, but I think, we can narrow it down. So yes, I was going to start in Revelation 19, verse 2, where it says that the martyrs were avenged by the judgment of the harlot. and those are the martyrs of the fifth seal. And so, we could narrow it down anyway to after the fifth seal. We could narrow down the judgment of Mystery Babylon to after the fifth seal. So,
hey Sam, let me ask you something. Do you see the seals as coming chronologically before the trumpets? How do you view that?
Yeah, I'm more, on the lines of Alan Kirshner and Nelson. I'm willing to change, and I don't know all the answers for sure. So it's just that's my sense right now is that they're sequential. But I would say I'm open to other views. So that's how I see it. But getting back to the Mystery Babylon timing event, the martyrs feel like their blood has been avenged in Revelation 19:2 after Mystery Babylon is judged. So it would appear to me that would occur after the fifth seal, sometime in the second half of the 70th week. So that's kind of my opening.
All right, very cool. And with that, we have Scott Harwell. Hey, Scott. We were just about to rag on you, but then we decided against it. But well,
Last week you had every reason to. I was on a boat and couldn't let you know I couldn't make it.
Yeah, I
Well,
don't see Scott.
you're looking very blue today, so that's.
I tried.
You know what? I don't hear Scott or see him. Should I leave and check back in? That worked for me last time.
Yeah, why don't you do that? And
Okay.
we'll be here waiting. All right. While he's out, I'll just say that my perspective, as I think I've shared already, is that the Book of Revelation is largely thematic, not entirely, but largely. And I would suggest that the seven seals are the full gamut of the entire tribulation. So I was just sharing my perspective while you were out, Sam. So glad that you're back. But please do go on and share with us as you were starting.
Okay, so that would kind of put the judgment of Mystery Babylon after the fifth seal, because the blood of the martyrs is avenged, which is interesting because that gets it close to the sixth seal, and some of the things that you pointed out before, and I've noticed too, both the judgment of Babylon and the judgment of Edom are tied to language that's used in Revelation. For instance, in Isaiah 34, verses 4 and 5, at the judgment of Edom, the sky is rolled up like a scroll. And so we know that that's sixth seal material. So if Mystery Babylon and Edom are different, I think they may be the same, but if they're different, then both of their judgments occur in the language of sixth seal material.
Mm-hmm.
I can't necessarily differ. I'm sure we're coming at it from a different angle. I'm looking at the fifth seal as being Yom Teruah, Resurrection Day, Spirit of Power. Sixth seal being Yom Kippurim, Judgment Day.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously seventh seal would be Sukkot, Feast of Tabernacles.
Mm-hmm.
So again, arriving sort of at a very similar conclusion, Sam, but in a different way, using the feasts.
Right.
And even different than Doug. And again, this isn't what I came up with. This is Halisa Elwine teaches this, and I've tested it. And I think, like when you start looking at even the seven letters and how they correlate to the seven feasts, and same thing with the first four seals, and Shavuot, Pentecost being that linchpin, that anchor. That links up the first three feasts in the spring and the last three in the fall. And I think that's what's happening here, that these events will occur on an appointed time. Mm-hmm. And so that's, what year I personally, and Doug and I align on this. We believe that everything is ultimately fulfilled. A future ultimate final fulfillment would be at during that same, I guess what you would call a 21 or 22 day cycle, wouldn't you, Doug? Like, in other words, Yom Teruah would kick it off, and then you would go to the end of the Feast of Sukkot and the eighth great day, all within the same calendar year. That's the way we understand it.
And somewhere in there is the transition from this age to the new age. Exactly where that falls within those days, I think, is a little bit of a coin toss, but basically that's the transition point that we're looking at. So, and every time we're trying to discuss chronology, right, we'll discuss, how the Book of Revelation is laid out. And I think that's part of the ongoing discussion. But I'm excited to hear what Sam has to say.
Chapter 14 is a good example of we know it's not a perfectly straight linear chronological document, because you have Babylon being judged here, and then obviously you have over in Revelation 18 you have Babylon being judged again. It's like you have these themes occurring. So this chapter is a good example that it can't be 100% chronological from Revelation 1 all the way through Revelation 22. It just can't.
Yeah. So, and I want to get to 14, but we were talking earlier about, I've heard, y'all visit about how long is the day of the Lord, and I agree, the 1,000 years, but as far as the judgment goes, we have Isaiah in the same chapter of 34, where he talks about a day of vengeance and a year of retribution. So to me, that looks like a day is being equated to a year, and if you have the 70th week being 7 years, then maybe that day of vengeance is the last year of that week, possibly. That's a question. And then in Isaiah 63, verse 4, we have a day of vengeance and a year of redemption. In Isaiah 63, where the Messiah is coming out of Basra with his clothes stain. So again, it's a year of redemption. And then in Isaiah 21, verse 16, it says that within a year, all the glory of Kedar will come to an end. And the Kedarites lived in the area exactly where ancient Edom was. And so we get in three places, we get kind of a reference to it. There's a year of retribution going on. It doesn't happen. It's not a singular point. And so I guess what I'm thinking is that, well, maybe Mystery Babylon, since that's the harlot, gets judged it gets destroyed by the beast. Well, then you've got time to deal with the beast, and that may even stretch out to a year of redemption, a year of retribution, a year for the Kedarites to come to an end. So
I'm tracking with you. I think that's really good because, again, I think we have all these bullet points in prophecy, and then sometimes we make the mistake of making them bullet point events, but a lot of times there's a whole process that goes along with that. And to go from the beast and the woman that rides the beast being really good friends to not being friends, something has to happen, right?
Right.
Well, they're friends.
They have a breakup.
They do. They have a massive breakup, and it's a terrible, terrible breakup. So much so that he wants to burn her with fire, right? There's definitely something going on. So I'm actually co-authoring a book with a gentleman from South Africa. We're calling it Regenesis. And in this scenario, we have the beast, the Antichrist, is working closely with the woman that rides the beast. So we've sort of made this character who embodies all of that she's going to be. And, they're both using each other, right? I think that's the thing we have to remember is that on Satan's team, they're all allies in a sense, only as much as they can use the other party to advance their own ends, right? God's kingdom is totally different. But in Satan's kingdom, it's all about me, myself, and I, right? And if I can use you to get ahead and to push my agenda, then I'll do it. And I think that's what the woman that rides the beast is doing. She's using the beast, and the beast is using her. And then once she has lost her utility, then the beast no longer cares about her and is willing to burn her with fire. Now, exactly what she is, whether she's a city or if she's a system or maybe both, is another discussion. But, at some point, he's going to burn her with fire. The 10 kings will burn her with fire because she's lost her utility. And I could easily see what you're saying, Sam, that there's going to be this duration that this is played out over that time. So I think it makes a lot of sense.
Can I ask a question? So maybe the sequence, I found a map with the Kedarites on it. So
cool.
But so the way I sort of agree with Sam that I think this is sequential, but that there's some overlap. So in other words, seal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, they open in a sequence, but their duration is like through the entire period of time, this last period. Mm-hmm. So that when you get back to like Revelation 19, where we just said that there was some language there that looked like it was talking about the fifth seal, because it referred back to the saints under the throne. So that you understand what I'm saying, the seal is operational for the whole period until the end.
Yeah.
they all kind of converge at the end, but they open in a sequential manner. That's sort of how I look at it.
Yeah.
And so that's why you see these references in later chapters, and you'll say, "Oh, that's the fourth seal, or that's the third seal, or something like that."
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of how I see it happening. Not so much that the seven seals describe the whole period of thematic, and then the trumpets and stuff are interwoven with that. I think they're sort of separate and distinct, but they're overlapping, I guess is the best way I'm trying to say it.
And that, I believe, again, I think we very well could be definitely in the first seal, possibly in the beginnings of the second seal, although it's really small right now. And we're having rumblings and forecastings of a third seal. And then, like you said, John, the fourth seal encompasses all of the first three, which would be pestilence or plague, war, the sword, famine, and then it adds in wild beasts. But
the stuff that happens in those seals is still operational when the fourth seal opens, and it builds up. It's like I said, it's like a giant crescendo in an orchestra that builds up over a long period of time.
And if we look at it like a chiasm with Pentecost or Shavuot being the center of the trunk, and then you would have first seal, second seal, third seal, fourth seal, from which the first three stem, and then you'd have your fifth, sixth, and seventh, and they all link up to the fourth from that chiastic structure. So, like in other words, Passover and unleavened bread and the feast of first fruits of the barley really aren't over until you count the Omer, until you get to Shavuot, and that's when the marriage was made. It was at Shavuot when the covenant was offered to Israel in Exodus 19. So I see some things happening on a future Shavuot, potentially before the final trumpet sounds. A sealing of the elect, a choosing of the bride, not a rapture, not a transformation into our immortal status yet, because that happens at the resurrection at the end of the age, but some type of supernatural gathering into the barn. And that's actually the gathering and the harvesting is in chapter 14.
The record will reflect that word was brought into the conversation tonight by Scott. I feel like we should have sort of like the remember that the Groucho Marx, when somebody said the word, the duck would fall down out of the ceiling or something like that. So.
Seeing as how I've spent the last 2 days just railing against that little R word in emails.
Let it go, man. Let it go.
I said the word.
I know you did. You said you didn't like that word. I
don't like that word.
One little side item, since Scott brought it up, but Matthew 24, where it says by the beasts of the earth, that Greek, and Doug, you're better at this than me. I'm not a Greek expert by any means, but it's a preposition that, does it mean by? But it could also be under the beasts. So maybe it's under under when the beasts are in charge. Maybe it's not by, maybe it's under.
What passage are you thinking of again?
Where Scott was relating the fourth seal, where you're
fourth seal. Okay.
Wild beast.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Or in Matthew 24, where it's talking about death by famine, plague, and so forth. I believe in most English translations it says by the beast when actually it could be under.
Upo is the word there. So it could be under.
Is that
hypo? Is that where we get hypo, like underneath?
Yeah, exactly.
Uh-huh.
Yep. So
it could be under. Yeah.
That's a possibility.
What verse is that?
It's 6:8. Revelation 6:8.
Oh, Revelation. Okay. I was looking at Matthew. Okay.
Yeah, I was just relating it to Matthew too.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think those wild beasts are not lions and tigers and bears. Oh my! Paul even calls those of some of the Pharisees that were not really nice people, calls them wild beasts trying to kill him. That's an example of how men are wild beasts. I relate it to a Hitler, a Stalin, a Mao, a Pol Pot, a Genghis Khan. And God has used Nebuchadnezzar's and Cyrus's and Caesar's and Alexander's to judge his people before, and I think that will occur again, because we're talking about this, but the why of all this is to bring repentance for
That's a great point.
His people,
Yep.
and
Yep.
those that are completely lost and not even part of, wouldn't know the kingdom if it hit them upside the head.
Right. Well, that's a great point, Scott. That the whole point of, well, a major point of Revelation is to bring about repentance, right? I mean, there's a number of things happening, but that is sort of from God's perspective. That's kind of the intended outcome, is that mankind would repent. But of course, sadly, it doesn't actually happen. We've got a question from Hawkeyes. He says, "What do you make of the harlot thinking she will not be a widow, nor see sorrow?" Revelation 18:7, and it's also in Isaiah 47. So there we have that that same passage. Anybody want to take a stab at that?
Well, the last time we visited that, we brought up Isaiah 47. It's addressed to the daughter of Babylon, and the language is duplicated in Isaiah 47, and it talks about that passage from Revelation. And so they're one and the same. They're going to both get their just rewards in a day. She'll become a widow, and she'll lose children in a day. So I think from that we could equate Mystery Babylon with the daughter of Babylon. And then, if we go to Psalm 137, there's a suggestion there that the daughter of Babylon is Edom. And they're interrelated. The Edomites assisted the Babylonians in the destruction of the first Jerusalem temple. And in fact, God held that against them and wrote the whole chapter of Obadiah to punish Edom for that. So I think that's an important point.
That's interesting. Okay.
So would you say that what she's saying in Revelation 18 is sort of a, I am a sit as a queen, I am no widow, and mourning I shall never see. It's just the harlot saying, sort of like speaking and ignoring reality.
Yes, out of pride.
Right. Sort of like, well, you're not going to get me.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. It's interesting that we have that. And then, when we look at the outcomes of the judgment of Edom and the judgment of Mystery Babylon, they end up being the same, in that, smoke rises perpetually, and they become the haunt of demons, goat demons, shaggy goats, and unclean birds and unclean spirits. And so the outcome, and they're both burned with fire. The outcome is the same. They're never inhabited again. They become wastelands. So I think that is there could well be a connection there. And if that's the case, then we look at Isaiah 34, where you have the sky splitting open like a scroll, and that then targets, a six-seal judgment of those two entities. It's interesting to me that in Revelation 18, it's in 1 hour, the judgment of Mystery Babylon comes to pass in 1 hour. That's in 18:10 and 18:19. And then in 14 verse 6, it's the hour of his judgment. So it's speaking again of fallen Babylon, which follows the hour of his judgment has come. So where we have a day of vengeance and a year of redemption for the entire thing to take place, it seems to me that the judgment of Mystery Babylon or Edom is on the very front end, and it's brief. It's briefer than the other. So I think that may be what starts off the that kind of judgment.
Yeah, since we got here to Revelation 14, let's take a look at that. Another angel followed, saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she has made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. Yeah, so we've connected some dots here, right? We've seen it in Revelation 14. Revelation 19 also speaks of the judgment of Babylon, right? So Revelation 19 speaks of that same thing, right? So, which is what we started with. For true and righteous are his judgments, because he has judged the great harlot, who corrupted the earth with her fornication. He has avenged on her the blood of his servants shed by her, right? And so, yeah, her smoke rises up forever and ever. And the 24 elders get pretty excited about this as well. All right. So, yeah, this is a major thing. Do we want to try to broach the topic of who is Mystery Babylon? Or Scott, why don't you throw something in there? You're muted.
We're going to go back to the first angel before we skipped over the first messenger.
Okay, let's do it.
I think it's all obviously this smacks some of our dispensational brothers who think that the gospel has changed. But the first angel is preaching the eternal gospel. In other words, the eternal good news of the kingdom.
Yeah.
The same gospel that Israel got preached, according to Hebrews, I think it's chapter 4, verse 2, that they heard the exact same gospel. And so obviously you've got some that I had a guy, I think it was when me and Krieger did our show about 2 weeks ago, that he was telling both of us we're going to burn in hell because we didn't believe the gospel of Paul. I mean, he was like angry, hostile
what does Paul mean? And when he's talking about the armor of God and feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace, is that not the gospel of the kingdom? I mean, could that tie into Isaiah and other passages?
I think it's the good news. Obviously, anything is good news.
There's like different. I don't know. I think Jacob explains it. There's different aspects to the gospel, and as we go through time, aspects of the gospel will be more important. So as we get closer to the coming of the Lord, the gospel of there's this coming kingdom and the king is coming and that type of thing is going to be emphasized more, I think. Then change the gospel. It's just that there's sort of the full orbed gospel that includes a lot of different.
Yeah. And Jesus was actually preaching the gospel, right? He was preaching of the gospel of the kingdom, the good news of the kingdom. I think what's happened in a lot of our evangelical circles, I'll speak for myself at least, is when I heard about the gospel, it was the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus. And that was the gospel. Okay. Like it didn't go any bigger than that. And yet when Jesus was preaching during the entirety of his ministry, even as late as Matthew 24, he's talking about this gospel will be preached to all the world and will come. He was not speaking of his death, burial, and resurrection yet. That had not even really entered the guys' minds yet. I mean, he started to hint at it, but they did not understand that the good news was that Jesus would die and rise again. Is that part of it? Yes, but it's not the sum total. And I think that's where we get in trouble, is because we start making that the gospel and nothing else.
Well, Peter
we divide everything. Yes, rightly divided. I still want to find the guy who started that.
Peter got it. He understood, and this is why some Orthodox Jews actually reject Yeshua as the Messiah. Peter's like, okay, Lord, is it now that you're going to restore the kingdom to Israel? In other words, Peter understood all these prophecies, Deuteronomy 30, Deuteronomy 40, all the prophecies in Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, and all these things about the gathering back of all of Israel, which included the lost sheep from the house of Israel. And Peter's going, hey, are you going to do this now? Are we going to have the rapture right now in which you're going to gather back all the lost sheep to Jerusalem and set up your kingdom, and the Torah is going to go out with an iron rod and an iron fist, and we're going to rule and reign with you? And he's like, It's not for you to know the times and seasons yet. Now, I think Peter got the memo later on in 2 Peter chapter 3 that a day with the Lord is just as 1,000 years, and there had to be 2 more days prior to the full restoration of the kingdom. So, but at that time, he didn't have the memo yet. He was still thinking Yeshua's about to kick butt, take names, bring back the lost sheep.
Yep.
Again, they were still learning.
John, you're muted, brother.
And Peter, looking down the corridors of time, he saw that Scott would be picking up on this.
So I think if we were to define,
and John too.
If we define the gospel, the good news, the way I define it is that you are out of the kingdom, but God wants you to be in the kingdom. That's the essence of the good news. And of course, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus is a very important part of that, but it's not the sum total, right? And so that's why you can have the gospel preached to those in the wilderness, though it did not benefit them because they were disobedient, right? They did not believe in faith. So even though God was in their midst, right? I mean, talk about the kingdom of God in your midst, and they're like, nah, I don't believe that. Let's go back to Egypt, right? I mean,
I want some cucumbers and leeks.
Yeah, it was so much better when we were slaves, right? Right. I mean, they could have anything they wanted. They just had to ask God, but they kept complaining, sadly. But I digress. So this whole thing in Revelation 14 is the everlasting gospel, the everlasting good news that God actually likes you and wants you to be in his kingdom. Like, that's seriously good news. And that's kind of the message from Adam until the very end.
Question for John. Do you know if Jacob Prash believes that there will be sort of a tweak or a change to the gospel after, like, and he believes in a rapture, obviously after the tribulation starts, doesn't set a time or a specific date on it. He just says it's after the tribulation begins and before the second coming, if you will. Do you know?
Yeah, I mean, he calls it intraseal. It's sort of a pre-wrath version. I've had a number of discussions with him about this because it's just kind of this rightly dividing thing that has always been a concern of mine, the 2 gospels. And so you'll see a guy like Robert Breaker who will take the passage about the angel, even though I or an angel, present to you a different gospel, let us be anathema. But he'll sort of take that and say, well, see, yeah, there's an angel in Revelation and that's a different gospel. That's a different gospel. And I think that's a huge error. And I know that Jacob doesn't believe that either. And I don't know if I'm answering your question. So yeah. I think he talks about that at different times, there's aspects of the gospel that are emphasized. And Mike Clapham, who used to be an elder at FBC, did just a phenomenal series on the armor of God. And that's sort of where I picked up on this feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. When you unpack that and go back and look at it, it really is about the gospel kingdom. Now, I've mentioned that a couple times, when I've taught or talked, and boy, do I ever get John Haller's teaching a different gospel. He's NAR.
Wow.
No, it's the same gospel.
Because he's talking about the kingdom, and I'm like, no. I mean, this is all going to be part of this. It's like this, we want to slice it up into this really nice little thing that fits in a tract. And I think that does a little bit. I mean, and it is simple, but it's full orb too, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
We were having this conversation just through text messages, chatting about Dr. Heiser and his position on it and how he hates even talking about eschatology because he sees the true part that there was a restoration of the kingdom. In other words, the lost sheep of the house of Israel and those of the nations, as a result of the death, burial, resurrection of Yeshua and the husband dying, can now enter back into covenant with him and be restored to the kingdom. He sees that. That's the true part about, I guess, what we would call replacement theology and how they view Israel. In other words, the church is replaced Israel, but not the replacement part. They get that part, the kingdom now part. But then dispensationalism correctly recognizes that God will keep his promises to Judah and to Israel. Now, they don't see Israel as being all of us and the church, as myself and Doug now see it. But we understand that, yes, there's going to be a little gathering at the end of this age. So it's been fulfilled, but not fully yet. We're going to live in this crappy age where Satan is still the prince of the power of the air, still running around like a roaring lion, has not been chained. And a preterist wanted to get me into a debate and wanted me to read stuff. I said, I really don't have time. I would rather watch paint dry. I mean, and I'm serious. I would literally rather go outside and sit in an ant bed than discuss it with a preterist.
It's interesting how some of these terms like the gospel can be so foundational, and depending on sort of where we land on these can steer some of our eschatology. And Scott, I'm glad that you brought up the whole thing of the kingdom, because another question is, what about Israel? And what we do with that will influence our eschatology as well, right? So you and I have had quite the epiphany over the last several years, where
Israel.
Well, that's right. Our eyes have been opened to the fact that we are part of the house of Israel, not necessarily the house of Judah, but God has to put those two back together, right? And so if you were part of the house of Israel, that God said, I'm not your God, you're not my people, get out of here, we're not talking anymore. And then they just became part of the Gentiles. They were divorced. That's bad news, right? That's a curse. And then God tells them, but one day I'm going to betroth you to me in righteousness. That's good news. Okay. The good news is that the broken relationship is going to be made whole again. And I think part of certainly it's not finished, but it's begun. Okay. And I think
that's why I chose for my background tonight, the House of Jude, guys from the House of Jude.
Nice. Yes.
Because I thought we were going to talk about 144,000, so I thought I'd invite a few minions of them over.
Hey, it's the 144,000 Jews. I think I cringe every time somebody. Not you, John,
I do cringe.
I just go. Well, it's like. Yeah.
So again, these are foundational topics.
Jewish evangelists.
Yeah, exactly. These are foundational topics that we have to wrestle with so that we can then go to Revelation 14 and say, okay, who are these 144,000? Are they Jews, as we've often heard, or are they 144,000 from the entire house of Israel, right? From the united Israel, if you will, all 12 tribes, right? And again, I grew up hearing that, they're just all Jews. And I was like, oh, well, okay. But now I understand a whole bunch of that, right? So a lot of times we have to do some deconstruction so that we can go back and try to get back into this. So, yeah.
Right. So the broken branches can be grafted back in, and we're grafted into the tree, So I agree.
Placement theology. I forget who I heard first say that. Maybe it was Bill Cloud or somebody like that.
That's good.
We're placed. We're grafted in. I mean, that's what it says. And now I've heard some dispensationalists and guys who I dearly love these guys, and they'll say, well, the wild branches, the natural branches were broken off, so the wild branches could be grafted in. But then the wild branches are raptured, so there's room to graft back in the natural branches. Because they're so tied into this division thing.
You gotta make it
and so listen, this is the picture in the background. That's from that gathering that they have in northern Israel. I can't remember the name of the town.
Meron,
yeah. And that's where they had the stampede a year ago, or a little over a year ago. And I think there were 60 that were killed or something like that. So this was all males. Because it's a Hasidic group. And I know all the things about Kabbalah and all this other stuff. But I watched part of that ceremony, and I had somebody that I know that was there. He's Orthodox Jewish rabbi, and I'm sure he's into Kabbalah and stuff like that. But it's kind of watching them, kind of trying to think is how do we take all this stuff that fleshes out the full picture of this and get it to them. You know what I mean? I mean, I feel like we're missing a big part of this, because I know there's a promise that they're coming back into this. And what part do we play in helping that happen? I mean, I know that some people will say, well, we'll just outsource it to the 2 witnesses and to the 144,000, and we don't have to worry about it. But I'm just not sure that that's a right view of that. And so I see this, and I watch them, what they're doing. I see the translations of what they're saying and their expectations. And to me, it's very emotional, because it's just like, it just seems so, watching prophecy unfold as this desire comes forth from this group.
Well, I believe some of the part that will make Judah jealous, that then they've been broken up because they deny Messiah. I believe.
Yeah, but how do we do that? How do we make them
I believe it's happening. I believe it's happening right now with those of us that are now starting to honor and keep the Shabbats and the feast days, and understanding, that Messiah did not change his Torah. He was the walking, breathing, talking embodiment of Torah. He showed us how we should then live. In other words, he didn't make the law tougher. He explained the heart of the matter and the heart of the law. And I believe as more and more in the church are now returning to that faith, that first century faith, I believe that's one thing that God will use to make them jealous. It's like, because again, Halisa has had people and other people that, like Orthodox Jews, going, well, why are you doing these things? It's like, well, I believe in the same exact God that you do. I just believe Yeshua was the Messiah. Well, why are you keeping Sabbath? Well, because Sabbath hasn't changed. And then they go, but Christianity says I'm not following the Roman doctrine. I've went back to the first century doctrine before the early church fathers started mixing things in. And I do believe that's what's happening around the world right now. There's more and more of our brothers in Judah and sisters in Judah that are starting to place faith in Yeshua. And there's more and more people in the church. They're not leaving Jesus. They might be leaving a denomination. They might be just keeping Sabbath with their family, or honoring the feast and changing their diet. That's really it. I mean, Doug, we've had that discussion before. As far as your fundamental faith, there's not much. We were both raised in Southern. I was raised Southern Baptist, dispensational, taught sin, taught repentance, taught that, drinking, smoking, chewing, and dating girls that do is sin. We didn't try to, what I'm getting at, and you don't play
going to movies, cards.
Yeah. Well, that's holiness church. But yeah, in other words, we were not brought up, and John, you were not brought up. And I'm assuming, Sam, you were not brought up in one of these liberal churches. We understood what sin was, and it wasn't sugar-coated. Now, there was just certain things we were taught were no longer a commandment. And now I see that and believe that they still are. And I just don't care what Irenaeus said or Clement or anybody. I really don't. And just based on sola scripture. And I think that's what's happening globally. And we're seeing Deuteronomy 30, those bones, those sinews starting to attach for the house of Israel, the whole house, which would include Judah, obviously. So,
I think that's a great question John brought up, and it takes me back to the Old Testament where God, it said that he has blinded their eyes and plug their ears unless they see or hear and repent and be healed. So some of it's kind of a divine blinding. They have a veil. I think that veil is lifted in Zechariah 12 when they look on him whom they pierced and they weep. And so that day is coming, but it doesn't really stop me from really reaching out to the Jewish people to share with them this hope that they're missing out on. But I don't know how to crack through it, because I think there's a divine veil that won't be removed until that point.
I believe it's already starting to crack, Sam, because Doug has said this before in Romans 11 when he used to read that passage and apply it just to the Jews about the partial hardening and blindness of Israel. And then one day, as he saw this, that we're grafted in that olive tree and we are Israel, it's like, whoa, that partial blindness has been the church. It's been me.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Doug, if you don't mind, real quick, pull up Isaiah 8, because it's not just Judah that stumbles.
All right. Isaiah 8.
Yeah, go down about to 11 or 12. Verse 11. Yeah, conspiracy. Do not say a conspiracy. Where are you? Nor be afraid. The Lord of hosts, he will be a sanctuary. So this is a messianic, but a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense to both the houses of Israel, as a trap and a snare to the habits of Jerusalem. And many of them shall stumble. There's the stumbling. We see that, Yeshua referring to that, Peter referring to it. They shall fall and be broken, be snared and taken. Bind up the testimony. We see John quoting this practically in Revelation. Seal the law among my disciples, my taught ones. And I will wait on the Lord who hides his face from the house of Jacob. That's all Israel. That's Judah and the lost sheep. Anytime you see Jacob, and I will hope in him. And then again, here, go down 2 more verses, like to 20 or 21. Yep, 20. To the law and to the testimony. If they do not speak according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. And so I believe Christianity, the church, the house of Israel that's been grafted back in and hasn't understood their identity, has been blind to the Torah because of Constantine and Marcion. And we just were taught that Sabbath, the dietary instructions, the Zitzio, things of that were Jewish. And then if we actually read scripture, it's not Jewish. It's just not. So I do believe and Joel pointed out that some of the Orthodox Jews and Hasidic Jews, they do not want you keeping Shabbat. They do not want you. So that's going to provoke them. Why are you doing things? Why are you Christians doing this? Well, believe in the same God.
That is, It's a great point. So the question was brought up: how they were brought back in? So what I propose in Cryptic Image 3 is that you have national Judah, okay, that rejected Jesus. Okay, so on a national level, they rejected him, right? But we know that many of the average citizens, average Judeans or Jews of the ancient world, they accepted him. Tens of thousands accepted him. That's what they told. That's what James told Paul when he came to town. Hey, look, there are myriads, right, that have accepted Jesus and are zealous for the law, right? So when Jesus came into Jerusalem there on that triumphal entry day, what were the people saying? Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, right? So they were accepting him as their Messiah. But it was the leadership that said, we're not doing this. And so Jesus says in Matthew 23, he's talking to the scribes and the Pharisees, and he says, see, your house is left to you desolate. And he says, you will not see my face until you say, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Well, all those guys are dead. Okay. So I don't know how those guys can do it, because it's not those guys. It's that corporate body that has to make this decision. And that's what we see in Isaiah chapter 28, which says, woe to you, scornful men who rule this people in Jerusalem. For you say we've made a covenant with death and with Sheol. So the thing that the Lord was showing me, I got really excited about. I was trying to understand how he's going to annul the covenant that they're going to make. He says, look, you're a covenant with death. I'm annulling it. And I'm like, how does he do that? Right? Here's the solution that I believe that God was showing me, is that they make a covenant with death under the auspices on a corporate level, on a national level, under the old marriage contract. Okay. So the leadership of Judah makes a covenant. They make a deal under their old marriage contract. All right. And so when they then finally look to Yeshua and they accept the new marriage contract, then the old marriage contract dies and all of the obligations and debts that were part of that also die with that when they accept the new marriage contract. So I think we're not going to see, let me rephrase that. We're going to see the solution on a national level when they finally, after all of the tribulation has happened, they're going to earnestly seek me in their tribulation. That's when they're going to finally look to the Messiah and say, oops, we really blew that one. Okay. And that is when they, on a national level, are going to come into faith. Now, there are many individuals who have come to faith from thousands of years now. But as far as the national repentance, that's not going to happen till after the tribulation. Thousands of years now. So, I hear myself again. Nice.
Do you think the covenant of death has anything to do with division of the land?
Not in my opinion.
Well, the reason I say that is that, if I go to Joel chapter 3, I'll gather the nations to Jehoshaphat and enter into judgment with them on behalf of my people, whom they've scattered among the nations, and they have divided my land. I also look at Isaiah 24, verse 6, I believe. And it also alludes to division of the land. Let me pull that up.
Therefore, the curse has devoured the earth, and those who dwell in it are desolate. Therefore, the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men are left.
Yeah, let's see. Oh, no, the one in front of it. The earth is also polluted by its inhabitants, for they transgressed laws, violated statutes, and they broke the everlasting covenant. And if you go to Genesis, where it talks about the everlasting covenant, and it's repeated word for word in Psalm 103, and I believe it's 2 Chronicles 19 maybe, where it repeats verbatim that the everlasting covenant given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the land of Canaan forever, in perpetuity. So that's why I asked, is because it seems to me from Joel and here in Isaiah that at least the proximate cause of judgment involves division of the land that was promised to Jacob.
Interesting. So yeah, if I look at it as a glass half empty, half full scenario, I could see that. I mean, the scenario that I lay out is that the covenant of death is specifically a covenant that they make with Satan. However, to kind of see it through your lens, I think when they make this covenant of death, what I think they're doing is they are rejecting, obviously, God, and they're also rejecting the protection that they've had under the auspices of Michael, who has stood watch over Daniel's people, right? And so when they do that, I don't think that they're necessarily dividing the land, but I would suggest that they're now putting Eretz Israel under someone else's authority. And so, maybe there could be a connection there. That's kind of a...
because they were going to annex the Jordan Valley, and they were on the verge, within a week. And the United Arab Emirates said, oh, wait, don't do that. We'll make peace with you if you don't do that. And so, they kind of by default gave up their right to the land promised to them by God. And, I don't think they can do that.
Yeah. Sam, right now, what you're seeing is this. I've talked about this in some of my updates recently. There was it kind of was prompted in my mind by an article in the Wall Street Journal about something that it's sort of referred to as the Jordan option. It's sort of a rehashing of the old Elan plan, where they would give up the high ridge and from the center part of the West Bank towards the east, or to the west towards the Mediterranean. And then there would be like a corridor from Jordan, and there'd be a corridor from Gaza. And so they're calling it the Jordan option. And if you look at the Trump peace plan, it's almost a regurgitation of that. And it would be a disaster, give away the watershed and all this other stuff. So they're really, they're sort of like continually in a large way, a large number of them are shooting themselves in the foot about the land.
Right.
And it's very distressing to me because I think it does play into what you mentioned in Joel and that. And I think it does tie into what Doug says about the covenant, because to sort of protect themselves, they're going to enter into this covenant with the wrong
group. Yeah. Well, in Ezekiel 36, it speaks of it there too. A good part of that prophecy is not to the people of Israel, it's to the land. And so, it's as if he's speaking to the land, and he's going to vindicate his name by restoring his people to that land. So I think the land is intimately involved with what we're going to be seeing here shortly.
And I think in 36 and I can't remember if it's 36 or 35, but there's people there that are saying, this is ours. This is our land, not yours.
Right.
And I think it all it's kind of like it's sort of like the big tumbler, where
right,
something's going to come out at the end that looks right, but we're seeing all these things sort of in motion at the same time. And I think we're seeing it really in spades right now. I mean, with the visit of the president coming up, the man who's pretending to be president, and so he's going to go to East Jerusalem. I mean, even Barack Obama didn't do that. So I mean, it's just. And I was looking through before we started tonight tomorrow's the Friday Jerusalem Post, and it's just like, for my thing on Sunday, I just need to go up there and with a copy of the Post and start reading through some of the articles. It's pretty amazing.
I would suggest that it's really difficult, though, to apply the land verses because for some 1900 years they weren't in the land. Then they came back in, right? So there was never a time when they had all of it, and now they're giving it away. I mean, at least not in recent history, right?
We've been gone almost 2,700 years. I'm still in exile.
Fair enough. Yeah.
I mean, the house of Israel, unlike the house of Judah, did not get promised to return after 70 years. It would be the very end of the age.
Sure.
So we're all living in Rome right now. We're in that fourth beast. I think America's the big right toe of the Daniel 2 beast of the iron and miry clay. I think right now, like sitting here today, America's big right toe. I mean, we're sort of the head honcho Pax Americana Pax. I mean, we are the shizzle and the dizzle.
And I can say I've never heard that one before.
Big right toe.
Very creative, but I've never.
Okay, did I actually just coin something kind of cool?
Yeah, sort of.
I'm not ready to put it in the Revelation category yet. Let me mull on that one and chew around a little bit.
Getting back to what you said, Doug, I agree. It's not easy, and things change. I think when Israel returns to the land, the thing is once they give up their claim to it, and it gets verified by the United Nations, it's like it's done forever. It'll never be argued over. So I think it's kind of a point of finality if they say, well, we're going to give up land for peace and, make two nations out of the land that God promised to Jacob. John alluded to Ezekiel 35, where it is Seir or Edom, who says both these lands will be mine, even though the Lord was there. So there you have Seir, who's going to be judged because he covets Jacob's land. It's going to boil down to this issue of who's got what between Jacob and Esau.
Well, another thing too, I mean, we talk about this, and obviously I grew up on it about the division of the land. That little bitty tract of land over there right now is not even close to what was promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and what we see in the millennium in Ezekiel 40 through 48. After this age, when Israel is ultimately restored, I mean, we're talking a huge amount of property compared to that little sliver that Judah is in at this time. I mean, from the Nile to the Euphrates,
right? So and I think the scripture takes care of that too, Scott. If you look at Isaiah 26:15, which is, a judgment chapter, it's the same chapter of the covenant with death. Verse 15, thou hast increased the nation, O Lord, thou hast increased the nation, thou art glorified. Thou hast extended all the borders of the land. So I don't think they're going to realize the full extent of their land until Messiah returns and extends that boundary.
And again, and we're gathered back too. And it doesn't matter about your DNA whatsoever. If you want to reside with Judah, if that's where, if you don't have any DNA bloodlines in you for whatever reason, it says the stranger and sojourner, they get to pick and choose, sort of like Caleb the dog. He was a Kenizzite, but also a Jew. Although they didn't call themselves Jews back then. He was of the tribe of Yehuda or Judah. But that's one of my favorite go-to places to show that God does not give a crap about your DNA.
Well,
he does it. He's no respecter of persons.
I never did circle back to Revelation 14. We might have to do that another time. We talked around it, but
yeah, well, we did kind of go around it. So obviously, if in case somebody doesn't know, Revelation 14 is talking about the 12,000 from each of the tribes. We also see that in Revelation chapter 7, right? And so then Revelation 14, they are all on Mount Zion with Yeshua, right? So that's the essence of it. So part of our little rabbit trails here have been to try to figure out Judah, right? I mean, that's a major part of this. And as we've, I'm just trying to summarize a little bit, but as we have grown up with these different ideas, a lot of us, certainly Scott and I have had the same idea, probably John as well, that Israel equals the Jews equal Israel, right? We've now discovered that is not a complete thought, right? Judah is definitely part of it, right? But there were two houses, right? And this is why going back and understanding a lot of this ancient history is incredibly important, because it builds a foundation upon which we're going to get up here to our eschatology, but we have to come back to this really broad foundation of who are we talking about, right? And that's why we now believe that we're part of the Commonwealth of Israel, which includes the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And God's going to put them together, like he says, the two sticks in Ezekiel 37. He's going to put these two nations back together as one. They'll never be divided again. The gospel, the good news that we can be part of the kingdom, which was that the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus was very much a fulcrum of that, right? And that was absolutely necessary on a legal basis in order for the house of Israel to no longer be strangers from the covenants and promises, but to now be full citizens once again, right? So all of these things kind of circle back into this bigger question of who are we talking about when we talk about the 144,000. So that's definitely a big deal. We also kind of teased out the question whether these things are thematic or chronological. And I appreciate what John was saying, that, the seven seals seem to have some chronology, and I would absolutely agree. So I'm not, I keep talking about the thematic approach a lot, but it's not that I don't see any chronology. I just don't think that it's a strict chronology. What I mean by that is that first you have the seals, and then we go into the trumpet judgments, and then we go into the seal judgments. I would see them all much more kind of spaghetti versus waffles. All right. So they're all intertwined here to a large extent. But what I would suggest from my perspective is that when we look at the sum of the seven seals, we're looking at the sum total of that 7-year period plus the return of Jesus. Okay. So anyway, just to summarize,
I think thinking maybe next show we can stick to Revelation 14. It doesn't have to be next week, but talk about the Son of Man and his harvest, and then you've got that other fourth messenger / angel and the harvest that you do not want to be part of, that grapes of wrath harvest, and sort of what we're talking about, like as far as this chronology goes, you've got in the Gospels, it talks about the wheat being gathered to the barn first, prior to the tares. Here you have what appears to be the harvest of those saved by the Son of Man, Yeshua. And then again, if we're going to look at just chronologically and read chapter 14 as chronological, then you've got this other messenger angel coming out of the temple with a sharp sickle to gather up the grapes and throw those into the wrath, the winepress of the wrath of God. So we know, I think we can deduce pretty clearly that angel in verses 18, 19, 20, that you don't want to be part of that harvest. But again, it's sort of almost in reversal from what Yeshua is talking about, where the wheat is gathered into the barn for protection prior to the tares being burned. And so that's why it can get confusing. And I would be flabbergasted if there's one person at the end of this age that not that you're going to get any brownie points for having this figured out. No, seriously, the why is more important than the why. Okay. But I doubt there's anybody except in their own mind that has this all 100% figured out.
Yeah.
And we will look back in hindsight, just like we can now at his first coming, and go, oh yeah, that's easy stuff.
So this leads us to a question that Joel Blackford raised. He says, doesn't Revelation 14:9 refute the supposed 1 Thessalonians 5:9 wrath issue? Isn't the wrath, orge, only for those who take the mark? For God has not appointed us to wrath, but to obtain salvation by our Lord Yeshua. If you guys want to take a stab at it, if not, I'll take a stab.
Go ahead, take a stab. I've talked too much.
Not at all. Well, I think Joel has a good point. I would tend to agree with him that I think that the wrath is not necessarily the events of the tribulation, but I would suggest it's when Yeshua comes back, and he's specifically fighting against those who take the mark of the beast. So, Joel, I think we're in agreement on this topic. That I think many Christian teachers have kind of painted with too broadly of a brush here, saying that the wrath is anything. God's coming to judge this Christ rejecting world. Well, yeah, but specifically, he's coming to judge those who have taken the mark of the beast. They've sided with Satan in a very, 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 very clear and specific way, right? They're not just your average, I don't know if there's a God or something, but no, they've gotten on Satan's team in a big way. And I think that has actually influenced our whole doctrine of hell, which I know is a very taboo subject. Ooh. So I don't want to go too far down because I'll probably get assigned there by some people. But people take Revelation 14 and where it talks about the cup of God's wrath, they then take that, which is speaking specifically to the people that take the mark of the beast, and then they conflate that with basically any average Joe Schmo non-Christian kind of person. And I think that really does a huge disservice to the whole discussion of Gehenna, a better term than the word hell. Anyway, I've taught a lot on that, and it's hard to summarize that in just a couple sentences. So I won't say any more unless I get in trouble.
I will say this. It's interesting because we know that the beast and the first beast and the second beast, the false prophet, are thrown into the lake of fire. And we see obviously later on in Revelation about the lake of fire. But this is interesting where these people are tormented. They're tormented in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. It does not say it does not say that they are immediately cast into the lake of fire. It doesn't even say that they will be cast in the lake of fire. Mm-hmm. But guys, I am not pulling a John MacArthur right now and stepping in it. I am not. Do not take this mark and worship this image of the beast.
Yeah, don't
now,
do that.
I do not believe, as some teach, that the jabby jab is the mark. No, I don't believe that. I believe that it is something that they're setting up for where there will have to be some type of ID to be able to engage in commerce. There will be, as Doug, I believe there will be something that actually alters our DNA, and it will transform us into some type of chimera, superhuman, X-File type. I don't know yet. It's supernatural stuff, and you're going to do something to corrupt your DNA, and that goes back to did God really say no? You can become as gods, and I think that oldest lie in the book is going to be the lie perpetrated on humanity. You can become like us. You need to become like us because this really bad God is coming. This guy is coming, and we need to get ready to fight him. And it'd make like a. I wish like Doug's book or some of the other really well written books that incorporate this could actually get the production that an Avengers series got.
Just keep praying. It's coming. It's coming.
I know, but it would be. I'm just saying that even you could have different little plot lines, but even if you disagreed on the exact sequences, man, it would just be an incredible movie that would put Avengers and all the Greek mythology stuff to shame.
Yes,
we could agree that the beast system and the harlot system are both satanically inspired. They're both bad, but and they fight it out. But the kingdom divided against itself can't stand. So we know how that's going to come out. Yeah. I can see the argument for a thematic view. I tend to look at Revelation 14 more of a sequential view. I mean, you've got the gospel preached to the nations, and then the end shall come. And then you got fallen Babylon, which I think may be the beginning of that judgment period, which may last as long as a year. That's followed by the warning that don't take the mark, and then followed by the reaping of the harvest by the Son of Man sitting on the clouds. And then you've got a subsequent reaping of the grapes of wrath, which is maybe in my mind where the beast gets its just due. But that's kind of how I see it. But I'm not, we're within a year. We're within a year, so we're close.
Yeah. Hey, let me just kind of take us back here to 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. This is back in regards to the to the mark of the beast. Scott, you were bringing up a very interesting point that it says that they're destroyed in God's presence. I would argue that that's exactly what we see in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. It says, when the Lord Jesus is revealed, right? So the veil's taken away from heaven with his mighty angels in flaming fire, taking vengeance on those who do not go God, right? So he's coming in fire. And it says, these will be punished with everlasting destruction from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his power. Now, this is where we have to kind of dig a little bit into the Greek, because the word here is apo, which means from, but it can mean a couple of different things, right? So apo can mean like a genitive, something that belongs to somebody, or it can be what's called an ablative, like he went out from the house, right? And the way that it's translated here is the ablative, that they're destroyed away from, apart from the presence of the Lord. But I would argue it's just the opposite, that they are destroyed by virtue of, right? If you say that somebody died of smoke inhalation, right? Well, it's not that they were separated from it, but it's because of the smoke that they died, or because of alcoholism is how they died, all right? And not because they were apart from it. So a very big difference. And I would suggest that being in God's presence without a new body, that's what's going to do you in ultimately. And that is what the people that take the mark are going to be in big trouble, because they will then have no opportunity to be redeemed. And so therefore they are in this continual state of death, kind of a living death like a zombie. And then they're exposed to God's presence. And that's going to be a very unpleasant experience for them. So anyway, I just wanted to share that. We're pretty much out of time. If there's anything else that we needed to consider or share, any last minute thoughts, we can continue if you guys want with Revelation 14. I mean, there's always so much that we can keep plumbing the depths of this stuff.
I think it's cool. You got the three angels, then you got the fourth angel, which is kind of, he brings the hammer, sort of like the fourth seal incorporates the first three.
Mm-hmm.
And so we could do several shows just on Revelation 14, and I don't like to say chasing rabbits. I mean, it's all interconnected. I mean, you're talking about Revelation 14, but then you're going to Isaiah, and you're going to Jeremiah, and you're going to Ezekiel, and you're going back to the Gospels, and you're going to Paul's letters. I mean, Revelation, there's really not much new there. It explains things in more detail than what was already revealed to the prophets.
That's
both
the joy. Yeah, that's both the joy and the challenge of studying the book of Revelation, is you have to pretty much go through the entire Bible. I went through it in 16 months, and I essentially taught the entire Bible. That's why it took me so long, because there's so much in it. I mean, it's just so much great stuff. Somebody has the question, will this video be saved for later viewing? Yes, it'll be right here on my YouTube channel. So youtube.com/Doug Hamp. It's archived immediately, so I hope you guys are able to take advantage of that. But we're out of time, but we'll be back next week. We will continue on with this thought. If you are going to be in the Dallas area, I'm going to be teaching in Dallas with Ed Doss's fellowship. So you can seek out Ed Doss for information on that, exactly where that is. You can go to his Facebook post about that. Just search for Ed Doss and you should be able to find that. So I hope you guys can join me for that if you're in the area. Also, this coming Shabbat, I'm teaching through Judges chapters 7 and 8, where we have Gideon, and we see where God has to reduce for better use, right? So he's got to take away a bunch of stuff so that he can actually use Gideon and do some even cooler things. So I hope you'll join me for that. And please do like and share. It really helps the algorithm and all that amazing stuff. Till next time, God bless you guys.